Okay, so does this work? Yes. This panel was added to the program quite recently. We were invited by Professor Youngmin Kim to reflect and talk about our own experiences of the ICLA and thinking about what the ICLA has done and is doing for comparative literature, for connecting people within the discipline of comparative literature and world literature and so on, bridging the because this is the 70th year anniversary, something you've heard over and over again over the last week, the last few days. So bridging the 70 years of comparative literary dialogue and think about the present, but also the past and the future of the association. So I thought I would just say a couple of words of introduction that are somewhat kind of autobiographical, personal rather, and my co-chair Ipshita Chanda may also say something, and then we'll open to a few remarks from lightning talks from all the panelists here, and we'll try to keep within time. I have been involved in comparative literature for nearly 40 years, but with the ICLA for the last 15, and before that with the British Comparative Literature Association. And I've seen comparative literature as well as the association evolve hugely. Surely it has evolved in the 70 years since its foundation, and since, I don't know if you know this, but since T.S. Eliot was the first treasurer of the association. So I don't know whether our current treasurers think about their job as being very poetic, but it's an interesting fact. Some time ago, a couple of years ago, I decided to read through 50 years of Neo Helicon. One of the journals of comparative literature was celebrating its 50 years, and it has been, it's a journal that has been associated with the ICLA for a long time. It has published a lot of articles from workshops, seminars, and by members of the ICLA. And it was really interesting to read through in sequence the 50 years and see how approaches, focus, interest changed, but also the composition of the ICLA committee members that appeared, and then the shift from French to English that happened some kind of about 3-4 decades ago. You could see the majority of articles being in French, slowly moving to English, and now it's, and there were also German and other languages, and now it's almost entirely English. So that's something that we may want to think about. And then, of course, there's been, I've experienced a transition from having all the documents on paper to having them only electronically. And this is, saves a lot of time, saves a lot of trees, uses a lot of different types of energy. But what is, thinking about past and future, what is interesting or slightly problematic as well in this context is that we are experiencing a loss or a gap in archives, because as the members of the committee change, and tonight we'll announce the new committee, executive committee, council for the next 3 years. As the names change and everything is sent by email, there hasn't been a central archive, and there are some years for which we do not have the documents. So there was an archive until I think the late 1980s in Lausanne, in Switzerland. Then Stanford in the US goes to the early years of this century. And then I've started collecting my own, but there is a little bit of a gap. So if anybody here is interested in writing a history of the ICLA or searching through archives, or you have a PhD student that may be interested in that, or a postdoctoral project, let us know, because I think it's a project that would really be of interest, both to recover the past, especially now that we signed a collaboration with UNESCO and documentary heritage. It would be really interesting to try to reconstruct the archives and reflect on them as something that could happen in the near future, perhaps looking back. And this is something that maybe we should invest a little bit of energy into. For the future, there are so many areas of the world that we would like to involve more actively. Philippines, Vietnam. Philippines have a good presence at the Congress, but there is no national association, but there is a group of scholars that it would be good to involve. Malaysia, Indonesia, Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America. So there is work that needs to be done in the near future to make sure that the inclusiveness and representativeness of the different cultures, regions of the world, as well as approaches, are brought into the ICLA. There's a lot more that I could say, but I'd rather leave the space and the time to my colleagues. So I will stop my brief introduction here and ask Ipshita if she wants to say a couple of words as well.
Thank you, Lucia, and good morning. And it will actually be just a couple of words, because all that we are looking at in the future, Lucia has touched on. So, thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, there are two things that I just want to say, which I think relate to, the first relates to what we would like to see. I think I would very much like to see documented for ourselves in the future, and that is those issues of recherche littéraire or literary research, which appear to be lost to the world. So I would like to know more about where they are, the earlier ones, before they became, I mean, before they took on the form that they currently have, thanks to our editor, Mark Moffat. And so I'm looking forward to thinking about how we can make those available in the public space. That is one thing. And the other thing is just a summing up of what Lucia said. In 2012, Ngugi wa Thiong'o proposed the idea of cyber reality, which envisaged a stratified world of virtualized global capital, facilitated and constructed by artificial intelligence. So this conference is about technology and comparative literature, and I think we are taking a step towards understanding more deeply cyber reality. And in that context, this is the question that we might ponder on for the future. That can a comparative perspective of plurality and relationality enable us to animate the existential realities of living and engaging with alterity, simulated and virtual, for a humane and egalitarian future? Could that be the direction in which ICLA and all our colleagues could take both comparative literature and maybe the future world? Thank you.
Oh, hello. Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Sandy Berman, and I was the past president of the ICLA, so maybe it is a good moment for me to speak. It's hard, actually, to imagine my life without the ICLA. I think ever since I first got my job at Princeton, where I've stayed my entire career, I've been a part of the ICLA, though not a very active part at the beginning. I was just someone who went to the congresses when I was able, but followed it online. And there used to be a newsletter rather than a wonderful journal. And there was only the newsletter for a while. But I remember just thinking about it, contemplating. And at one point, I did start to think, what could I do within this organization that was in, I think it was 2011, 10 or 11, that I was starting to want to get involved with. And I think it had to do with a lot of people interested in translation studies, but there was no translation committee at the time, because there had been at one point, then it had fallen away. I still don't know how. And then it needed reviving. And that's when I first got very involved with the ICLA. It was because of the people and because of a history that had lapsed perhaps, but was ready to start out again. And I enjoyed that very much, and I was with that committee until I became part of the EC. With people here. I enjoyed the growth of that committee, and one of the things I want to mention that I think has happened in the recent past, and I hope will continue into the future, and trust it will, with all the good leadership here, that is the presence of a younger generation within the ICLA. Our e-care and our early career people in this organization are its futures, and they're the future of comparative literature. And that sounds kind of trite, but it is real. And when I started in the ICLA, there weren't many people who were on the younger side, the junior side of the faculty, certainly not graduate students, but now there are so many, and I think that's extremely important. I also would chime in on the interest in questions of working now online rather than in person, because I was president during COVID, so sort of had, a sudden need to do all of this. And I remember one of the things we decided to do was have a global publishing conference at Princeton, but it had to be for the ICLA. It had to be totally online. I mean, no one could come. And so we ended up working on that. And it was fine, and it was certainly an initiation into that world. But we ended up having, I think, a collegial time, but all completely online. And it even included meetings with it was an early career conference, so the people who wanted to meet with editors about possible book projects and so on were able to do that online as part of the conference. I didn't figure that out, but we had some wonderful digital humanities folks at Princeton who took it on. But anyway, those kinds of things that really immersed us suddenly into the world of automation and digital creation that we have to now think about and ponder as Icla and also, we've been talking about for a while at this conference. The last thing I want to say, because I could talk a long time, I have a lot of memories and a lot of wonderful hopes for the future for the ICLA, but another good thing that has always existed here is, well, two things: collegiality. There's really a sense of getting to know people, whether it's online or offline. We get to know each other, and many of you sitting in the room. But that was how I met Youngmin Kim, for instance, was in the translation committee, and I've followed the careers of a lot of the younger people who have gone on. But so I think I will actually stop there. That's enough from me. But I just hope the energy continues, the liveliness continues, and also the great committees for research continue, because that's one of the most important parts of the ICLA as well. So thank you very much. I think that's enough from me. Okay. Are you next?
Okay. It is a great pleasure. Close. It is a great pleasure to speak before you today. I'm Noriko Hiraishi from Japan. So I would like to offer a brief reflection on the role of comparative literature in Japan, particularly in its historical and ongoing relationship with the International Comparative Literature Association. And Comparative Literature and Comparative Culture Handbook, edited by Imahashi and Inoue, was published last year and has been well received. The cover of this volume bears the phrase, I quote, "In an age of division, a renewed inquiry into the wisdom of comparative studies," unquote. The general introduction of the handbook highlights the significance of re-examining the canonical works of modern Japanese literature, for example, those of Natsume Soseki, through the lens of his perspective on the annexation of Korea, and in comparison with writers as Lee Guan-su. This approach reopens up important avenues for understanding the complexities of literary modernity in a transnational East Asian context. Japan became an institutional member of the ICLA in 1958, an early and significant step that attests to the active engagement of Japanese comparatists from the post-war period onward. When we look back at these early interactions, several illuminating moments emerge. In the very first issue of Comparative Literature, the Journal of Japan Comparative Literature Association, published in 1958, French literature scholar Kenichiro Hayashi contributed an essay titled "Lecturing on Japanese Literature in a Foreign Land." This was based on his 1957 experience teaching a course on Japanese literature at the University of North Carolina, invited by Professor W.P. Friedrich. It is notable that this university would host the second ICLA Congress the following year. What is particularly striking here is the fact that Japanese comparatists were, even at that time, called upon to speak about Japanese literature abroad from a comparative perspective. Still then, many comparatists, whether or not they are specialists in Japanese literature, have taken on the role of meditators, helping to cultivate global interest in Japanese or Asian texts through comparative inquiry. At the same time, these international engagements brought into view the prevailing Eurocentrism in the field. In his 1979 essay, Japanese Culture, Accommodation to Modern Times, published in the Yearbook of Comparative and General Literature, Sukehiro Hirakawa critically observed that comparative literature in the West resembled, in his words, I quote, "a sort of greater West European co-prosperity sphere," unquote. David Damrosch would later cite this observation to underscore the West-centric orientation of 20th century comparative literature. A major turning point came with the 13th ICLA Congress held in Tokyo in 1991, the first time the Congress was held in Asia. With more than 1,000 participants from across the globe, it marked a decisive moment for increased visibility of East Asia within this discipline. The Japanese bid to host the Congress was first introduced in 1985, and preparation began in earnest soon after. As Takayo Kano, who served as Secretary General of the Tokyo Congress, later reflected, what drove their effort, above all, was the desire to shift the flow of comparative literature studies, which had until then been centered to Europe and North America. The organizers emphasized comparative literature from Asia as a key theme. In 1989, as a prelude to the Congress, a conference of East Asian comparatists was held in Tokyo, inviting scholars from Korea, China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. At the Congress itself, held under the theme of the force of vision, East Asian scholars played an active role in panels such as translation and modernization and contemporary East Asian cinema and its relationship to traditional theater. Since then, congresses have been held in Hong Kong in 2004, Seoul in 2010, and Macau in 2019, and East Asia has grown into one of the major arenas of comparative literature. This current Congress in Seoul, the second to be held in South Korea, presents a valuable opportunity to carry the legacy forward. It offers not only a space for individual scholarship, but also the chance to strengthen regional and transnational collaboration, just Lucia had mentioned earlier, and perhaps to chart new directions for our field. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's near, okay. So, yes, hello, here's Márcio Seligman Silva. I'm from Brazil. Thank you very much, Youngmin, for the organization of this wonderful Congress. Thank you, here, to hearing us. Thank you, Lucia, for your fantastic work in the last years in front of ICLA. Well, I will speak a little paper only. I will speak a little about this, also the connection between Brazilian Comparative Literature Association, ABRALIC, and ICLA. So, good morning, esteemed colleagues. It is an honor to address you at the ICLA Congress in Seoul. I will briefly share the history and significance of the Brazilian Association of Comparative Literature, ABRALIC, and its deep ties with the ICLA. In the summer of '85, Paris hosted the 11th ICLA Congress at the Sorbonne. The event was a vibrant hub of global scholars where diverse languages, cultures, and methodologies intersected. For Brazilian scholars, attending this Congress was transformative, immersing them in a dynamic universe of comparative literature debate. It was in the Place de la Sorbonne that a group of Brazilian participants resolved to establish a national association to advance comparative studies in Brazil. This vision materialized in '86 with the founding of ABRALIC during the first Latin America Seminar of Comparative Literature held in September at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, Porto Alegre. The event welcomed comparatists from Europe and Latin America, and ABRALIC adopted a powerful symbol, the anthropophagic imagery from the 1928-29 Revista de Antropofagia. This emblem, rooted in Brazil's modernist movement, reflected ABRALIC's commitment to bold aesthetic and cultural reinterpretation. In 1988, ABRALIC held its inaugural Congress in Porto Alegre, presided over by Tânia Franco Carvalhal, with the theme Intertextuality and Interdisciplinarity. The event attracted scholars from Portugal, France, United States, Germany, Italy, Canada, Belgium, and Spain, establishing ABRALIC as a key player in global comparative literature. The renewed Brazilian critic Antônio Cândido, speaking at this Congress, eloquently captured ABRALIC's mission. He described it as marking a new phase for the discipline in Brazil, moving from the spontaneous and individualized efforts to an institutionalized field strengthened by professional exchanges, specialized journals, and associative life through conferences and symposia. ABRALIC's growth continued with its second Congress in 1990 in Belo Horizonte under Eneida Maria de Souza, focusing on literature and cultural memory. During this period, ABRALIC transformed its initial newsletter, Contraponto, into a full-fledged comparative literature journal, further solidifying its scholarly impact. By 1990, ABRALIC had become Brazil's largest association of literary scholars, a testament to its role in fostering comparative studies. The connection between Abralic and ICLA remains strong. The ICLA Congress of '85 inspired Abralic's creation, and ICLA's global network continues to shape our dialogues and collaborations. As we gather here in Seoul, Abralic reaffirms its commitments to advancing comparative literature, bridging Brazilian and international scholarship in pursuit of shared knowledge. Thank you for hearing.
Yes. Dear friends, it's a great occasion to look back and also think of how we actually proceed into the future. My own association with ICLA has been in this 21st century from the Paris ICLA Congress onwards, to be more precise. But I've been very active in Comparative Literature Association of India from '86 onwards. That was the time when I was working on a few projects, particularly related to modernism in Indian literature. When I wanted to do my doctoral work on modernism in Indian literature, the professor I approached, he was also a very reputed critic in his own mother tongue, that was Kannada, Indian language. He said, you can't do it in English department. And after 50 years, in Indian universities, you can hardly see a person doing anything in English or American literature. The way things have got transformed in the last 50 years is really an eye-opener. We have almost every department has a comparative literature component. Ipshita works in a central university. I am associated with at least 2 central universities. And many central universities have, and state universities do it more in their languages. But these local, what you call vernacular, quote unquote, they are all national languages. In India, I wouldn't say there is a national language. There are 25 or plus national languages. So this very complex linguistic scenario also makes it imperative that we have a discipline like comparative literature, where the literary output, which actually is substantial in each of these traditions, is studied, taken care of. Last 2 Booker Prizes have been won by Gitanjali Sri in Hindi, another by Mushtaq in Canada. There have been lots of course, Indian English writers who are already on the list of celebrities. I would actually say my preoccupation with modernism in Indian literature has given me a whole lot of opportunities to examine comparative context. I had a plenary lecture in the Vienna ICLA Congress titled "The Many Languages of Indian Modernism, from Reception to Resistance." And it examined that is available in the proceedings. It actually is a very long essay on the way at least 3 Indian languages have negotiated the idea of modernist literature. And I very strongly argue that modernism in Indian literature is not a derivative duplication of European or American high modernist ideology, but it was an expression of the internal contradictions of a society caught in the conflicting pulls of a post-Nehruvian era, which actually was mired in many problems of which were not easy to intractable problems. By the way, Nehru was one of the persons I have actually seen in India quoting T.S. Eliot for the first time. 1930s, he quotes T.S. Eliot's famous lines, "The world will end with a whimper and not a bang." So we have the modernizing legacy of Nehru, but it had contradictions. I have also explored in the last 10 years, because this study of modernism brought up issues which on one trajectory goes towards a critique of Eurocentrism and all that goes with that. I remember a very important context. I still start citing from a novel by O.V. Vijayan, The Legends of Kazakh. A few villagers are discussing whether the new school which is coming up is a welcome idea or not. There is an old Muslim priest who is opposed to it. There is a self-styled young visionary priest who is for the school. And then the people finally come to the conclusion that truths are many. You see, this idea, the oral culture's ability to accept contradiction, there are divergent views, truths are many. This polyphony of truth is something which a society like India has internalized through many performance forms or theatrical forms or the pre-colonial oralities, many manifestations. So this is something which opens up a whole lot of possibilities. We need to actually look at the marginal voices which are very often untranslatable, which are even unspoken. And this also, I can see a series of novels written in my mother tongue or first language, which are very strongly critical of the idea of the nation state. And I don't know how this evolved in the last 20 to 30 years. Fiction has become a very powerful form of putting forward philosophical, political, and sociological ideas, which perhaps it's much ahead of social sciences. I can mention a few novels. For example, a novel like The Hanged Woman, available in English, K.R. Meera. It's about the question of hanging, and the whole story is set in Bengal, Calcutta. A Malayalam novelist crossing the boundary of her language, talking about a family which has been traditional hanging, you see, people, hangmen and hang. And now a woman actually has become that official. And a very complex but very demanding novel. We have a novel by T.D. Ramakrishnan which talks about the Tamil Civil War. We have a novel from Benjamin which talks about Jasmine Days, the whole question of Western Asia, is Egypt to many of these Gulf countries, the liberalization and the consequences. We have Harita Savitri, a young novelist, talking about Kurdish people fighting in Turkey. What's a Malayalam novelist doing in Turkey? But this Malayalam novel has been, now it's translated, has been actually received very well in Malayalam. Maybe Malayalam has this traditional affinity towards the Arabian Ocean and the land beyond. So the language has a tendency to cross the boundary. So how do you look at phenomena like this? You cannot look at them within the frame of one language. Even in Malayalam, it actually is a translation. So I've been working on a process. I've been writing a series of articles on some of these novels, both in English and Malayalam. So comparative literature, translation studies, crossing the boundary, all these are inherent in the kind of situation I am in. And perhaps what I do for ICLA has a certain kind of opening up of these areas for me at the global scale. Thank you so much.
Does this work? Okay. So I'm Mark Mofor from the University of Brussels in Belgium, and I'm the current editor of the association's journal, Recherche littéraire and Literary Research. I've been the editor for 10 years, for the past 10 years, and this year will be my last year as editor of the journal, the 2025 issue, because the journal is an annual publication, will be my last issue. And I would like to take this opportunity to reflect on the history of the journal. And I would like to mention at the outset that this was a pleasure for me to serve as the editor for 10 years, and I thank the ICLA for that wonderful opportunity of collaborating with people from around the world, really. So the journal was created as a newsletter, basically, in 1981 at the instigation of the then president, Eva Kushner. And she really wanted to have a journal that focused on the publication of book reviews, because she argued that too few books in comparative literature were ever reviewed in existing journals. And so we started as a newsletter, published twice a year. I myself contributed book review in those years, and I still have the newsletter. Looks very different to what the journal now is. And then the journal moved to the University of Western Ontario, where it became more substantial, not simply a journal of book reviews, but also including articles. The only problem then quickly became the costs involved in the mailing of all those issues, because they were so bulky, heavier, and of course ICLA at some point could no longer afford mailing out the issues. As a result, unfortunately, the journal went dormant in the first decade of the 21st century for quite a few years. It was resurrected, so to speak, at the instigation of our president, Dorothy Figuera. In 2007, she commissioned John Burt Forster to try to revitalize the journal, and he did so successfully for a few years, and the journal returned to the format of a book reviews publication at that stage. It was typeset by John Forster himself, so the association was the official publisher. Expenses were still a concern to some extent. Dorothy Figuera herself took over the editorship for 3 years, if I remember right. And then, of course, in 2015, I was appointed as the next editor. Hans Bertens, our then president, offered the position to me. I must confess that I at first refused, because I realized that I might not be able to carry all the work, linked with that responsibility. And then after a few weeks, I changed my mind, and I have never regretted since, because this was really a remarkable opportunity to be creative in a way, because thanks to the ICLA, the journal had all the freedom to commission whatever material it wished to publish. And so I was able to first publish book reviews, then review essays, longer book reviews, several books or perhaps the state-of-the-art research on a particular subfield of the profession. And then, must have been 5 years ago, I decided to reintroduce scholarly articles, and we also made the decision to get our scholarly articles, even though they were commissioned, to get them peer-reviewed. And we have operated on that format for a number of years now. And it seems to work better every year. The 2024 issue of the journal was a bit delayed because of production issues, but it was finally released just before the Congress, and the board members have received their own digital copy. It's available for you all on the website of the association. It is now published by Peter Lang, so we have secured a regular publisher for the publication of the journal. It's no longer published by the association alone. And they publish the journal in gold open access, with a few hard copies being printed every year. So this ensures more visibility for the journal, but of course hard copies can still be purchased at cost should anybody wish to have a hard copy. Let me talk a little bit perhaps about the last issue I'm working on, the 2025 issue. It's going to be a fairly interesting issue with a number of scholarly essays ranging from topics such as eco-criticism and the Anthropocene, even going back as far as Shakespeare and the Dream. We'll have a number of interesting review essays too, including on minor literatures, the topic of small literatures, and then, as usual, some 20 book reviews. So the best is yet to come, perhaps I should say. And talking about the best, we have, I'm pleased to say, secured a successor for me, a young colleague from Sweden, from Göteborg University. She is British. Alice Pick-Duhan is her name, and she works in French literature. So she has the bilingual competence that is required for the journal, because we publish in the 2 languages, of course. And I'm working on the transition with her. We have already had a number of Zoom sessions. We are going to have a few more. I think I'll even visit her in Sweden. So the 2026 issue looks very promising. We've already started thinking about that together. So once again, thank you for the association for enabling me to fill this position for so many years.
We certainly thank you for filling it.
Okay, thank you very much. I am He Chenzhou from Nanjing University, China. A few years ago, Chinese Global Times did a survey about the most influential foreigners in the 20th century in China. Number 1, Karl Marx. Number 2, Engels. Number 3, Lenin. Number 4, Hans Andersen. And then Henry Ibsen ranks number 11. So the teaching, translation, and the research of foreign literature and the comparative literature thrived in China, especially since the early 1980s. One of the pioneers in comparative literature is actually a former colleague of mine at the English department of Nanjing University, Professor Fan Cenzong. He did his PhD at Harvard University in 1931. And his PhD dissertation was about Chinese culture in the Renaissance, England. So, and then many years afterwards, in 2001, I did my PhD on Ibsen, Henry Ibsen, and the modern Chinese drama at Oslo University, Norway. So, and well, from only the history of comparative literature at English department at Nanjing University, we have seen rapid development. We have a PhD program, MA program in Common Lit. Well, this year celebrates the 70th anniversary of ICLA. In China, we celebrate the 40th anniversary of CCLA. And then in my province, I'm currently the chair of the Jiangsu Province Comparative Literature Association. We also celebrate the 40th anniversary of our association. And we organize numerous conferences and seminars on comparative literature. I assume most of the people here present, including people sitting on the stage, may have attended conferences, symposiums on comparative literature in China. So, and I want also emphasize that, almost every major university in China has PhD or MA programs in Common Lit, and some even have BA programs in Common Lit. And we have also numerous journals in Chinese English in this field. And well, what I want to finally emphasize is that, the translation of foreign literature has been massive over the last century. And also, teaching of foreign literature started very early on, even from primary school. I remember I read A Doll's House, the Act 4 of A Doll's House, when I was in grade 5 in primary school. So you can see, because there's this kind of education of foreign literature in Chinese schools, so they provide a fertile soil for doing comparative literature studies, And right now, we are not only engaged with translation of foreign literature, teaching, transmission of foreign literature, we are also trying to find out more new ways of doing research in comparative literature. One of the directions is intermedia, because we have also a rich tradition of arts. I used to be Dean of School of Arts at my university. So how to combine literature in different forms of art? That's another new direction of Chinese comparative literature. Well, by the way, in 2019, ICLA had its Congress in Shenzhen in Macau. And I hope, in the future, or the near future, we would have the honor of hosting another ICLA Congress. So hopefully, we will see you again in one of the Chinese universities. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emanuele Santos. I am the chair of the Icla, the Early Career Researcher Development Committee of the ICLA. Now, different from some of my colleagues with whom I have the privilege of sharing this session, my involvement with the ICLA is not very long. Though I think it is no less meaningful as we speak of the development of this association, right? I first arrived at the ICLA 9 years ago, when my PhD supervisor suggested I participate in the 2016 Congress that took place in Vienna, as it wasn't too far and thus relatively affordable for me since I was studying in the UK. By the time I submitted my abstract, I was finishing my thesis. And by the time I participated in the Congress, I was just a few months off from having successfully passed my viva. Having just lifted my eyes off the intense work on my PhD, at the time I got to Vienna, the world felt a bit like a scary place. I had just turned a major page in my academic career, which was in many ways only its first page. Looking ahead, I have a challenge that many of you know, which is the challenge of the blank page. No job, no certain line of income, and a time-limited visa to continue my life in the UK, and at a Congress with over 1,000 participants, of which so many are important names in my field. Yet, what I found when I joined the ICLA Congress that year was that the kind of intellectual environment that I always wanted was there. A myriad of scholars from all over the world in an environment that felt like every single possible aspect of human culture was interesting to somebody. A place to hear papers on phenomena that I had never seen investigated before, as well as a place where phenomena I know really well were being approached from a myriad of perspectives that greatly enlarged my own. It was large, dazzling, and long. I know, right? The intimidation I felt when I entered the registration hall to get my badge dissolved as soon as I listened to colleagues delivering their papers and the fascinating discussions that followed. The multiplicity of perspectives that came with the diversity of participants was invigorating. No speaker, no matter how senior, was left unchallenged in the Q&A. It felt energizing. But the future still loomed heavy ahead of me. Nearly arrived, as I was, in the postdoctoral limbo of precariousness and uncertain funding. Would I ever be able to participate again now that my PhD scholarship was over? Luckily for me, it was just at the Congress in 2016 that the ICLA decided to transform their long commitment to the next generation of scholars that Sandy referred to, and commitment to the future of the field into a more concrete and visible initiative. So the commitment was always there, but it wasn't quite as palpable, quite as visible. It was in that year that the Executive Committee decided to start a committee to support early career scholars who were in a situation just like mine. In the last 9 years, since the institution of the committee, it has become a more structured and stronger part of the life of the association. Thanks to the work of the last 2 chairs of the committee, Isabel Gil and William Sperlin, in addition to the participations grant and the Anna Balakian Prize Committee, we now have a comprehensive structure of support for early career scholars. Now, we not only offer recognition of excellence through the Balakian Prize or facilitate attendance via the participation grants. Through the activities of eCare, our association now have a few more mechanisms to support career development through opportunities that combine recognition of work excellence, which is always good for the CV, funding, which is essential to help those at the beginning of their career to stay in it, right, and publication. These include our first book subvention prize, the best translation prize, and the best graduate paper presented in a conference, all 3 prizes which features in our association journal. So all of these prizes include mentioned translations, or even when it comes to the first book subvention prize, it includes a review of that book into recherche littéraire, literary research. So, and on top of that, of course, we have the visibility of the eCare of us within the ICLA Congress program for papers that are now part of the next generation of scholar that can be voted for the best graduate paper too. So prizes, however, are not only close to the full extent that the CLA shows its commitment to early career scholars. Having joined as a chair of the committee in 2022, I have had the opportunity to witness how important the needs of the next generation of scholars are for the association and how much commitment there is in continuing the support for us in the years to come. Now, when it comes to plans for the future, those continue strong. As far as I'm concerned, even though I can't speak much of the last 70 years of the association, when it comes to the next 70 years of the association, I'm sure it will be even more open for innovation, welcoming and change, and ready to support its members in taking comparative literature further on. Thank you.
I think I'm next. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Reynolds. I'm from Oxford. And my job in the ICLA is that I'm chair of something called Research Development Committee, which means that I help to kind of nurture new research initiatives and help them to form themselves into what we call committees, but what we mean by a committee is really just a research group or a research network, which is a great thing to do and get involved with. So if you're tempted at all in that direction, if you have any ideas for that sort of research initiative, please get in touch with me. I haven't actually, even though I'm old, obviously, I haven't actually been involved with the ICLA for very long. I think, and this says something about the intellectual environment I was in, I would say in the UK, but perhaps it's also more importantly first in Cambridge and then in Oxford, in the discipline called English, which is what I'm still employed by and what I started my career in intellectually. I don't think I even barely heard of the ICLA till halfway through, till I was 40 years old, probably. So I'm just going to do a kind of before and after story. So I guess like many of us in the room, when I was a kid, I just liked reading. And what that meant in the UK was that when I went to university, I found myself studying this subject called, not called reading, but called English. Which after a while came to feel, I mean, almost actually immediately sort of felt a little bit odd. I mean, it wasn't just English, because I was able to do some work with Italian and some work with ancient Greek, but nevertheless, really, that what counted as literature really was, you know, a version of literature inherited from a 19th century nationalist construction of what the literary was and what it was to be educated in the literary. So there was a narrowness to that. I think looking back on it, I mean, that narrowness wasn't, I mean, obviously it was problematic in all sorts of ways that we all know. I think it wasn't entirely bad because there are some aspects of the training I got in that tradition that still really matter to me and I think should matter to all of us as comparatists. One is attention to the particularities of language, close reading basically, attention to the particularities of the words in front of you. And the other is a kind of historicism, so attention to the particularities of the context of the text you're looking at, and bringing those kind of interests, I guess, into a comparative context. What you see is that, and the way I brought them with me is that, you know, I'm very interested in working with translation now, and working with translation doesn't mean that you float above the particularities of close reading. It means that you need to pay all the more attention to the particularities of the languages through which the text you're interested in is moving. And when you're working in a multicultural and multilingual context, as Wen-Chin Yang's lecture just showed, it doesn't mean that you sort of float above the particularities of the context. It shows you need to pay all the more attention to the complex particularities that are being negotiated in that kind of space. Anyway, so I was in this thing called English. Once I got through that and started to do my own research, I was interested in writers who weren't really writing English, who were interested in Italian, for instance. I was quite interested in how engagement with other languages enabled them to kind of stretch what counted as English. I then got interested in translation as a creative form. One of the books I wrote was really very much about sort of attacking the marginalization of translation from the story of English literature and wanting to put translations back into the center of the story of English literature. But then, even as I was writing that, I came to feel there was something kind of paradoxical about that enterprise, even though it was very much institutionally sanctioned by the context I was in. Because really what you should be doing, if you're interested in translation, is constructing different significant geographies, to adopt that term from Francesco Rossini, which is to say you should be following the text as it moves between different languages and cultures beyond those that you yourself know, not configuring translation as a process that sort of flows into and enriches the monolingual channel, which is the nationalist way of looking at it. Unfortunately for me, having this idea coincided with my stumbling upon the existence, first of all, of the BCLA, the British Comparative Literature Association, and then the ICLA, you know what that is. And I did some organizational work for the BCLA before I got involved in the ICLA. I mean, there's something a bit paradoxical, isn't there, about having a national comparative literature association, and these associations, as we've heard, really only, you know, it's crucial for these associations to be part of the international network that the ICLA then helps provide for them. And I must say, would you say this is fair, Lucia? That wasn't necessarily always completely obvious in the environment of the BCLA for a while, although perhaps not as bad as in the ACLA sometimes, as Sandy was just. But anyway. But what the ICLA. So when I encountered the ICLA, what that enabled me then to do was to collaborate. So for me, ever since that moment, collaboration has been fundamental to my practice. The idea I had of translation as generating multiple texts which need to be studied together, so what I call prismatic translation, that was enabled by discussions in the Literary Theory Committee of the ICLA, the study of the example of that, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, as it exists in many hundreds of translations, translated by many hundreds of translators into more than 60 languages. That work was done collaboratively with people who I met through the ICLA and could only have met through the ICLA. So I'm hugely grateful to the ICLA for enabling this practice of plurilingual and collaborative literary exploration, which is really what I now do. Looking to and indeed the questions, the sort of ways of theorizing translation and what I call translationality, and how AI enters into that zone, which is what I'm now concerned in, similarly rely on these collaborative connections. Looking to the future, I think the thing that concerns me, and again, this is picking up on something you said, Wen-Chin, in your lecture, really, is about what our medium of communication should be. So picking up, Lucia, on what you said about, you know, in the past, in the journal you were reading, part of it was in German, and part of it was in French, and part of it was in English. And as we all know, English is becoming our homogeneous medium of communication now. And I don't think we should sort of resist that by saying, well, we should go back to insisting on different national languages in a Congress. But I do think it raises a question for us about how we maintain what Halliday would call a semio-diversity, or what Sakai would call the heterolingual address, which is to say what the plurality of forms of languaging that's appropriate to our practice as academics and critics should be. Because there's the sense that, you know, plurality and inventiveness is out there in what we study, and what we do in studying it is bring it into a more homogeneous and a more disciplined environment. Well, in a way, that's necessary. That's part of establishing a clear medium of expression in which we can share ideas. But there's also a loss in that, and I think that always needs to be resisted by a sense that our critical voices and our critical languages and our critical practices should also be diverse. And I think that's something that's going to be important for us to nourish in the coming years. Thank you.
So I'm Stefan Helgesen, based at Stockholm University. I used to be on the executive committee. This time around, I've chaired the nomination committee, and I'm also vice chair of the research committee on history of literatures in European languages, Icla. Now, the first thing to say is that comparatists have more fun. Where else but at the ICLA can I learn about Chinese translations of Greek tragedies, Indonesian female superheroes, and games played in the salons of Paris in the 17th century, all in one go? Comparative literature makes our world bigger, especially today in a time of geopolitical isolationism and, frankly, madness. So for that, I'm eternally grateful to the sprawling field of comparative literature and to ICLA for bringing us together. Lamentably, one continent is almost absent from this otherwise splendidly global conference: Africa. There are various reasons for this, I believe. One of them being, in fact, that the field of African literary studies, whose strength was recently manifested at a large conference in Nairobi, often does not think of itself in terms of comparative literature. This is a misapprehension, I believe, within that field, but the absence of Africa is also a hangover from an earlier age when conflict was strongly Eurocentric. The leadership of the ICLA today is aware of the need to have a stronger African and Africanist representation, so they are definitely working on it. Africa, Southern Africa to be precise, is of course the starting point for most of what I do. And comparative literature has been a way for me to come to terms with the contradictions and idiosyncrasies of my own formation. Being Swedish, yet having grown up in South Africa and Mozambique, having a Global South orientation, but being trained as a student and PhD in a very Eurocentric Swedish version of literary studies, being multilingual, yet based these days in an English department. I know, there is a problem there. What does one do with that? One becomes a comparatist. As I have happily discovered, remaining true to one's idiosyncrasies can create new and unexpected connections. Given my own interest in working across English and Portuguese, of all things, language has also led me across the Atlantic, making some of my work possible to describe as Global South comparatism. Then it turns out that the particular Africa-Latin America axis of comparison, previously ignored for the most part, has in recent years become an incipient field of its own. Sara Quesada and Magali Armias Teixeira even put together a dossier or roundtable on the online journal Global South Studies recently, devoted to Latin American African studies, something I probably wouldn't have given a name if they hadn't done so. So really, in conclusion, I just want to praise comparative literature and the ICLA for the openings made possible by this uncontainable field of inquiry. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind, again, looking to the future, what new connections need to be made. And there again, I think there's work to be done when it comes to Africa in the ICLA.
Thank you so much for the gathering this way, celebrating 70th birthday of the ICLA. As I have been the Congress chair, I try to formulate all this structure or this pattern of our Congress following after starting from 2010, which I first attended in Korea, in Jungang University, hosted by the KCLA. At the time, I was a member of KCLA still, but I was the president of the English Language and Literature Association of Korea. And then at the time, the Congress chair, Professor Jung Jong-ho, was the president of the English Language and Literature Association, ELAC, and I was the next president. So he invited me to participate deeply about. So I invited the very much like as if I'm an organizer, but I'm not organizer at all at the time. And then I met many people, some people here, and also a lot of people from around the world in terms of the ICLA. Since then, my development of further interest in the ICLA is multiple. I've been attending the KCLA Kiss West in Korea. I've been attending the ACLA in the US and meeting many friends here, and David Demrosh, and also many Haun Sosi, and also Sandra Berman, who were the president of the ACLA. And I even went to China. I met many people from CCLA and met many the scholars from China. And I become I'm one of the chair professor of the Hangzhou Normal University. I'm affiliated to that since 2018. I used to be the Jack Ma chair professor. I was lucky enough without speaking any Chinese at all, but thanks to the machine translation, I can learn how to communicate with the people in China. And also, I just attended since 2010, and after that, I attended in 2013. I went to Paris, Sorbonne, and then 2016, to Vienna, and then 2019, even though it's a typhoon, I went to Macau, and then during the pandemic, I attended the Georgia, and now here we are. And then as I attend many different kind of ICLA conferences, I feel like this is global, real global world. Even though I attended the individual national representative of the Comparable Literature Association, I feel like it's also. But why don't we get together in one place and one time, one spot? So that's my vision. Looking ahead of the 2022, I volunteered to bid for the 2022, but I failed because of the nature of the beauty of language and culture in Georgia. But pandemic occurs. And then next time bid again in 2025 now. So I think feeling like this real global community. And my field is English literature, basically. And as I was deeply involved with the modernism, Yeats found Eliot poetry, and then later contemporary poetry, critical theory, things like that. And then things happen differently from everywhere in the world. First of all, from the MLA in the US, they have all representing different disciplines and also subjects. So I learned a lot from them. Then now, 2015, there's sudden revelation of the digital humanity comes in. I'm now very deeply involved in digital humanities, and ADHO is representing global world. I've been part of the conference organizing committee too. So this way, digital and comparative literature. Last year, we just established digital comparative literature, co-chaired with the Simone Rebora. And my mind is so kind of ransacking all different databases of the world, and it's so confused about time and place. So I don't know where I'm staying now, and sometimes I'm in China, sometimes in Sweden, where I have a visiting professorship. Stefan Helgesen from Stockholm University, and I met him in Stockholm. I gave a lecture on Yeats and Nobel Prize at the university thanks to him. So things like that, people are in mobility, not only mentally. Previously we had writing about travel writer, narratives, but now not only mentally, physically, time and transtemporal, transspatial phenomenon is occurring anywhere in the world. But this time, when I tried to organize a mega conference here, I encountered many setbacks because of money, place, time, and then lack of communication. We can't do anything. Originally, we did not plan to have the hybrid Congress or online Congress at all, because it costs a lot more money when you have a big place, Kintex like this. Everything we do add is kind of cost money. So I think I better not have this excuse for their lack of communication and setbacks and failure, and then stumbling over all the time. And a lot of people complain about all different areas. So this is basically my situation, but the other side is this challenge. I failed better, like Samuel Beckett once said. I failed better. I learned a lot of lessons from these kind of failures. This time, it's not only me, it's all the conference in the whole world. Like last time I went to ACLA in Montreal, not many people failed to attend. Instead, they promised that to have the real in-person conferences again in the convention center. So that's new phenomenon. They're changing their style. I tried to hold this conference at my university. How can I accommodate if we have 1,500, 1,000? It's impossible, even though we can have separate the facilities, the seminar rooms, things like this. So I think this is a great opportunity. At the same time, we still encounter the crisis, many different crises. Then I think this kind of the discovery of openness, of digital transformation, and this is a quite recent development. So I think as I trace back all the ICLA Congress here and there, I suddenly become interested in translation because between languages, between cultures, different nations, translation is very important. And then when I attended 2019 conference in Macau, and the group of people are gathering for the translation committee, at the time, Senator Berman was the president of the translation committee. Somebody from China, Wang Ning, is my close friend, who used to be the CCLA president. He suggests me, why don't you appoint him as the president of translation committee? But I did not want at the time. But later, after 3 years later, I was appointed as the president of translation committee. Now my interest in current translation status is machine translation, which is very enticing and everywhere prevalent in every discipline. So my interest in kind of globalization of the ICLA comes from KCLA, ACLA, CCLA, KISWES, and ICLA everywhere. I'm also a member of the BCLA. I paid membership and CCLA. So things like this is a kind of, we have a new tendency. Now ICLA should not stay stable. These things like this should be staying meta-stable, looking forward to their transformation, looking for the different phase. So I wrote an essay about comparative literature studies in Korea. I just elaborate about what happened during the past years since 2010 to 2017. And I learned that the Korean scholars in humanities and in literature, they are all comparatists. I learned that. Even though they are not present here, they are listening to maybe later they can listen to the YouTube kind of streaming. They might participate more. And then these days, most English professors and English students, also any different foreign literature, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or even Vietnamese, and all the foreign language departments are focused on this comparative literature. But disciplinary speaking, we don't have any structure yet, but all different program. So that is one of the problems. So my last thing is that I'm really interested in the combining digital and comparative literature in terms of my studies start from modernism, postmodernism, cultural translation, transnationalism, and convergence of world literature, digital humanity, and transmedia, and technology, and AI, machine translation. Everything there, I'm jack of trade on nothing. But I'm still trying to learn a lot as a student. I try to figure out how all the nations, all the languages, all the cultures will combine in a better world, not in a crisis way. So eventually, ICLA will be the open space for this kind of structuring or different formation of the literary studies. Not only literary, but all the disciplinary interconnection or the convergence, or consilience of all different subjects. So I think that's my understanding at the moment.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your short talks and the range of things that have been touched upon. I think one of the things that stood out for me is some of us talked about their national associations' role within and involvement with ICLA. Some spoke about their research and their role, like editor of Recherche Littéraire, chair of ICARE, and involved in ICARE before. It's an interesting tension, if you like, between the structure of the ICLA, which has been kind of institutionally that developed and was founded as and developed as a kind of umbrella association of national associations, and a slight uneasiness with this national paradigm that we all talk about as wanting to go beyond, but that we are to some extent still trapped in, because institutionally it's very difficult to get beyond that completely when the funding that exists for universities come from national funding bodies, the appointments are made at national level, or university function within national structures. And then there are the research committees of the ICLA that whose role is to focus on topics, areas of research, and do that by drawing upon people that work from different areas, that have different approaches, and therefore we try to sort of go beyond the national paradigms in the research that we do. But still there is that tension to some extent, and listening to all these papers, it really brought it home to me how that tension still exists there. And then there's this kind of more personal aspect of how do we become comparatists, or how do we operate as comparatists? I mean, many of us became comparatists almost by default, by being, like when I was 11, I decided I wanted to study English, and because I was Italian, well, I still am, I'm both, I studied English and was doing English in Italy, and then moved to England, and because I was bringing my Italian language and knowledge of Italian literature, I somehow became a comparatist. Some are trained as comparatists because they decide to study comparative languages. And I wonder whether there's different perceptions of the discipline depending on how you came to it. Are you more structured, or are you kind of somebody that is used to sort of bringing different perspectives in? And one of the things that I think as ICLA we should do, and we've started doing, and we should do more about, is finding ways of making our national associations collaborate with each other, interact, do kind of joint projects, precisely in order to, because we can't very often, the positions we're in terms of jobs, we can't escape the national structure, go beyond it in terms of what we bring to the discipline, how we operate within a discipline. Are there other sort of questions from speakers for each other, or from the floor? Are there any questions? We've only got 2 minutes left, so maybe there's space for one question, if anybody has one. Can you bring up? A race for who gets there first.
Well, hello everyone. It was all the interventions were really interesting, so thank you first of all. But I think there's one point lacking in many of the interventions, so I will ask about that now, which is the future of ICLA, because some of you indicated that you are hopeful with the initiatives that are currently going on right now, but what are the plans, or what do you think of the field in the future, especially that we are now in a context where everything is changing a lot with this little thing called AI that is revolutionizing everything? Thank you.
Matthew, would you like to say something, because you are the AI specialist here?
I think this is a massive crisis point for the humanities, and therefore also an opportunity. So it's scary, but also exciting. And for me, one of the scary and exciting things is that suddenly loads of people who know nothing about languages or translation or literature are using those terms. So that you go to the landing page for an AI and it says, here I am, I can write a poem for you. And what this means is that, millions and millions of people who have never previously, been at all interested in poetry are suddenly engaging with it to some extent. Now, what they get is a kind of simulacrum, or it's really both tantalizing and frustrating, or that, other key literary words like style, like translation, like creativity are suddenly, the massively of the moment words. And it's, so I think we really need to find ways of getting in there. And I mean, I think there is also, I've said this before, probably on this stage, but I think there is, there's a fundamental issue about the value of language difference and how we perform language particularity and language difference and the creativity that goes along with that, because for me there's a fundamental connection between language variety and creativity. Linguistic creativity is doing something different with language, and so the resources for doing that come from language variety. And how we stand up for that and maintain that in the context of, the homogenizing tendencies of AI, but also that little potential there is in the way AI registers language difference to kind of open up new ways of interacting linguistically. I think it's a huge challenge. Do other people?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So that's my perspective.
Honsus has just joined us because there was a clash and he was in a different panel. I'm not sure we have the time for another presentation because we are.
He's
just here to lend support.
To lend support, okay. Just one thing I very quickly wanted to say, following on from what Matthew was saying. It's a massive crisis, and therefore you said there's an opportunity. And that reminds me of how the ICLA and comparative literature as a discipline has always seen itself in crisis. From in the 1950s, Welleck was talking about the crisis of comparative literature, and then comparative literature was dead. And every time we're still here. So I'm hoping that going forward, looking to the future, we can carry on as comparatists and as an association, having that role, and I've also said this before, we kind of repeat ourselves a bit here, but having this role of being a kind of critical eye and self-critical eye on what we do, how we do it, as things change, not try to pull up defenses, but accepting and understanding and also informing how things can change and bring, like what Michael was saying, people use words and concepts like literature and language and without knowing what they're talking about. We are the experts. How can we inform that discourse that is changing? How can we take part in that, in those debates? And I think all of us do in different ways. So I think that should be our role. But it's easy to say, that's what we have to do, and then in 2 years' time things will be completely different because new technologies will come up, and we have to constantly reinvent ourselves. That is also why we always feel that we're in a crisis. But crises are moments of reinvention as well.
Can I add one?
Yes.
Very intriguing question, but not only that, but also for whole the issue of the comparative literature in the whole world. I think the AI is both critical, also maybe how do they very profitable to me. Because as I recall, my first studies with the poetry, poetic thinking goes with the algorithmic thinking as well. Like sometimes the automatic thinking comes from, we don't know what we are thinking of until we speak. So language matters. It's kind of the Freudian idea of the unconscious, conscious is now relevant to the machinic non-conscious. So non-conscious, the machine is not out there, external one, but actually it's internal or maybe part of ourselves as a kind of tool. So machine and human, body, mind, soul work together as far as we are working properly. but I mean, actually the unconscious level, they are the destructive force as well, constructive force as well. Also the machine has a destructive part and the constructive part, so it's not binary opposition. That continuously developing further into which I learned a lot from the French thinkers like the Georges Simondon, the pre-individual state. And then intention. Everything is intention and in crisis, but later to be redirected in a better form and constructive way. So I think this is the way why we need comparative understanding of what reality is. You got AI and also all digital transformation. Look at the internet. It's kind of web itself has transformed from first stage, second stage, third stage, now semantic web, which needs some kind of the big data formulation. We have to deal with the big data in terms of we have to have some technique. I think the AI is very convenient to find out. We don't know what's there, the unstructured data there, but I mean, AI knows a lot of database because it can get access to the huge data. Still, it's a minor, small database. In compared to the 100 years later, all the data will be gathered together, which means that the archive, our comparative literature, world literature is composed of the archival understanding of each individual language and text and culture. But still, as a person, I don't know anything about the other languages except the learned language like maybe English, French, German, small amount, but the other Chinese, Japanese, a little bit. But what about Arabic? Nothing. I don't have uhipka, uhipki, only that word. I love you. That's all. But I mean, that's very important. If you say, I hate you, then your problem, issues and words and everything. I love you. As far as still you are in conflict, in tension, but later you can be something like, oh, we are friends. We can globally community, communal spirit coming in. That's why comparative literature association is very crucial in constructing this kind of community. And this has been kind of that's why I changed it from non-streaming to streaming. I think that now people are looking at so it's connecting. Interconnecting is very important.
Thank you, Young-min. It's true that connection is the most important thing. And our presence here, I think, is a testimony to that. Another thing which you said, which I would like to be the last word perhaps, that love is very important given the conditions and the times in which we live. I think our connections, our relations, and our acceptance of the plurality of the world and our attempt to engage with it, which all my colleagues on the stage have talked about from their own particular locations and from their own particular experiences. And this conversation will end now, but it is going to continue. So thank you to the audience. Thank you very much to Young-min for making this possible. Let me repeat that our 70 years of existence has brought us here, and I think the journey forward for all of us is to work together. Thank you so much.